Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see so many faces. Hi there. I see a lot of familiar faces as well. We'll go ahead and get started. I think more people will be trickling in, but let's go ahead and dive right in. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And right off the bat, apologies for any dog barking you're hearing in the background. I think we're all, dialing in from home. So thanks for joining us today. My name is Zelda Keller, and I am the Executive Director at the Institute for Climate and Peace. It's a Friday afternoon or morning or evening for some of you, and I'm sure many, if not all of us, are coming off of a busy week and really looking forward to the weekend. So I just invite you to settle in and take a deep breath and enjoy this next session with us. The Institute for Climate and Peace is a climate justice organization based in Hawaii. And we know that when rights are accepted, neighbors enjoy good relations, information flows freely, and resources are more equitably distributed, all indicators of positive peace, exponentially fewer people suffer the effects of natural disasters. So our organization advances positive peace to build equity and climate resilience for the communities most affected by climate change. We're gathering today to learn and share about the topic of biomimicry. And at ICP, we often look to life on our planet to reveal models and forms of assessment that guide and inform our work to advance peaceful and climate resilient communities. And we are so very, very thrilled to be hosting Toby Herzlich and Dan Kinzer today, two biomimicry experts. Toby is a nationally and internationally recognized facilitator, trainer, organizational consultant, and executive coach. She is the founder of Biomimicry for Social Innovation, an enterprise dedicated to applying nature's genius to leadership, social change, and organizational development. Toby has worked with groups like the Turner Foundation, the Cultural Conservancy, Greenpeace International, and the Navajo Nation. And this is my very favorite part of Toby's bio that gives me goosebumps, is that she likes to spend time hiking she loves to spend time hiking in the high mountains and digging into the garden. Feet, hands, and heart very close to earth, which has always been her greatest teacher. And Daniel Kinzer is with us today as well, and he is the founder of Pacific Blue Studios, a growing network of youth-powered exploration, design, and innovation studios, leveraging biomimicry, indigenous innovation, and conservation technologies. He leads entrepreneurship, innovation, conservation, and sustainability programs with young leaders in multiple community partners, like the University of Hawaii, Punahou School, the School for Examining Essential Questions of Sustainability, Purple Maya, and the Polynesian Voyaging Society. He's an educator, designer, adventurer, and ocean lover. And he spent nearly 2 decades living and learning across more than 70 countries and 7 continents. It's such an honor to have you here with us today, Toby and Daniel. I have been counting down the days to this workshop and to spend this time with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us away. Thank you.
Thank you, Zelda. That's a very kind introduction, and we're really honored to be here to support your forward-looking mission. And thank you to the 60+ folks and more by the second that are joining us. Thank you for clearing time in your day to be part of this. I think there are people here from all over the world, and I am beaming in from Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is traditionally the lands of the indigenous nations. So I want to honor that and acknowledge and express gratitude for those who have stewarded this land for so long and continue to. I also have learned that when one comes to enter the Hawaiian Islands, it's respectful to come and ask permission for what we are to exchange and to come with humility and gratitude. And so we're entering in that way as well. So thank you. Really appreciate ICP embracing biomimicry. It feels like a really important time to do that. Nature has so much to teach us about navigating disruption and adapting and evolutionary leadership, which are all things that your work is about, and that this time is calling for so much. So many intersecting disruptions going on now that many of us are experiencing. And I also just want to acknowledge that probably people in this virtual room together are experiencing the effects of COVID, of the economic implications of COVID and climate change. We've got lots of political change going on in the next few weeks. Just so much happening. Our nation's reckoning with our history around social justice. So it's a good time to be turning to nature for wisdom, because we think that there's a lot there to learn. So again, thank you for inviting us. Our purpose today is to share some ideas and some practices. I understand from Zelda that many of the people in the ICP community, this might be a first time learning about biomimicry. So we will do an overview of biomimicry at a pretty high level, and then we'll dive a little bit more deeply into a couple of specific practices that we think are relevant for this group and that we can learn a lot from the natural world about, around regeneration and resilience. So we're hoping to seed some new practices, introduce some ways of thinking, get some dialogue going, and point you towards some local resources that you can follow up with. And I am thrilled to welcome my colleague and friend, local resource, Daniel Kinzer, who is a mentor of mine in many ways, a student of mine in some ways, a fellow biomimic, and right there in Hawaii with you all, who's just doing great work connecting land and culture and biomimicry. So Daniel, could you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Aloha, mai kako. It's nice to see everybody, and mahalo nui to Toby, who, we should be clear, is my teacher and my mentor. So it's such an honor to be here today with you, Toby, and mahalo to ICP. And while we went through that introduction, I was able to sort of scan through the crowd that's here today, and so many friends, so many people who I love so much here today, so many new faces, so many exciting people that I get to know in this call. So thank you to everyone who joined us today. Making me a little bit more nervous, but it's really nice to be here with you today. I always enjoy learning with the Institute of Climate and Peace. I've been a fan since I first learned of their founding and their leadership team. I also consider mentors and teachers. And so it's just a really fitting place to be speaking about biomimicry as part of an event that they've organized. I want to just share as an introduction a little bit about my journey to Hawaii. I am not Kanaka, I'm not a native Hawaiian by blood. I voyaged here from Taiwan and then China 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, following Hokulea home on her worldwide voyage. And if you don't know about Hokulea, we'll find out a little bit more about the incredible canoe and the family, the Ohana, associated with that canoe a little bit later. And I was lucky to get to spend my first 3 years here in Hawaii working as the director of the Luke Center for Public Service at Punahou School, where I had the really good fortune of getting to know so many of the people on this call and people across the community here in Hawaii who are doing incredible work to grow our resilience, to be coming back and revisiting that community in conversation with all of you. At the same time that I moved to Hawaii, I actually began my study in biomimicry and my practice that followed. So it's relatively recent. I would say I'm a lifelong student and learner of nature, but the terminology and practice, specific practices of biomimicry, are things that I'm still uncovering and imagine I'll be uncovering for a long time. So that gives you a little bit of background. I did join the Biomimicry Professional Program, or the B-Pro program, and that's where I had the good privilege of meeting Toby, who's a mentor and facilitator in that program. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of, I'm not that far down the biomimicry road, but I think, like many of us on this call, have a deep respect and love for the earth and for our planet and for humanity, and want to see all of life thrive. And I think whole mimicry are a natural fit. I think nature and culture, ecology and community. So mahalo for having me today with us, and mahalo again to Toby. Hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. Excuse me. Before we dive in, Daniel mentioned scrolling through the screens, and I want to encourage you all to do that. I'm guessing that most people know how to use Zoom by now and spend a lot of time on Zoom, but I want to respect those maybe for whom this is new. So just want to point out a few things about how we'll be using Zoom today. If you take your cursor up to the right-hand corner of the black window, you'll see that you can toggle between speaker view and gallery view. And for a moment, let's just put it on gallery view. And if you're lurking with your camera off, if you wouldn't mind, if it's possible for you to do so, to just flip your camera on for a second so we can see who's here. And take a look at all these faces of people from all around the world. There's two little triangles on the right and left of the screen where you can scroll between the screens, the different windows, and see people that you line, lots of biomimicry friends, and places, and lots of people that I don't know, and I'm really happy to have a chance to get to know you in this context. So really wonderful to see you all. Thank you for being there. We will also be using the chat function. So if you haven't yet, please scroll down, and on the bottom navigation bar, you'll see that there's a chat window. And if you open the chat window, you'll see that you can chat to everyone, or you can select who you want to chat to. So if there's somebody on the window that you're like, oh, I haven't seen them in a long time, you can send them a private chat. If you have technology needs or problems, you can send a private chat either to Zelda or to Kiona, who's helping us on the back end today. You can try sending a private chat to me and Daniel, but we might have our eyes in other places on the screen, so I might not be able to respond right away. Please know that if you put things in the chat, it will become part of the record. So by writing in the chat, you're giving your consent that your voice is shared in that way. And in fact, let's give you a chance to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let's just play with the chat for a second. Please put in your name, tell us where you're from, and maybe just a word or two about the field you work in or your interest. Let's get a sense of who's here and have some engagement through your own fingertips and your own attention. You type your message, you press return, and I imagine we'll start seeing the chat scrolling by. Great. Excellent. New Orleans, San Diego, hey Colette, California, lots of places in Hawaii, New York, Maui, wonderful. Charleston, beautiful. Aloha to you all. I think this is a meeting of the ways gathering. Very happy to see that. Good. Okay, and as that's happening, I believe in, especially when we're talking about nature, we want to invite nature into the room as much as we can. So I'm going to share my screen and bring some beautiful visuals in. I hope you can see my screen now. Daniel, give me a nod if my screen is visible. Awesome. Okay. And as we begin, I'm going to ask you to bring nature into the room in your way. I want to invite nature into our circle. So please just think about an early time in your life when you were inspired by the natural world, a place or an organism. And remember what that felt like as a young person. That sense of awe and wonder and delight. Maybe it was awe, a place that meant a lot to you, or that feeling as a small person of having the sun on your face, the wind in your hair. We will invite you to listen and learn today with that same sense of awe and wonder, because that's what nature has to offer us. So I just want to say right from the get-go that I'm not a biologist. I love organisms. I was the kid in high school who wanted to free these guys instead of cut them apart on the dissecting table. My work is with people. I've been working with people in groups for nearly 30 years now, supporting the collective intelligence of networks and organizations. I facilitate collaborative social change efforts. I've been training leaders so that people can come together and achieve the transformative results that they want to see in the world. That's my work. But I do love nature, and I'm a gardener. These are my teachers every day in my backyard. And I live in the Rocky Mountains. And just like many of you who have deep places in nature that you love, I feel deeply connected with that world. And I go to the mountains for sustenance and renewal whenever I can. And I've always felt, as I've been doing my day job with groups of people in rooms, and my weekends and evenings and wherever I can being out in nature, that there's a way that these worlds can come together. There must be things that we can learn from natural systems that we can apply to the work that we're doing with human systems, because after all, we are not separate from the natural world. And about 10, 12 years ago, I discovered a practice called biomimicry. It's a design discipline that was introduced to the world, or maybe reintroduced to the world, by a woman named Janine Benyus, who you see on this slide. She wrote a book called Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature, which is a modern practice using contemporary Western science, biology, and it's really kind of a remembering of ancient and indigenous ways of knowing. It's a design discipline of getting out into the natural world, observing nature, listening deeply, starting to see where there might be some deep patterns, and then applying the learnings from those patterns to human sustainability challenges. I know that many of you out there are biomimics, and maybe some of you have heard of biomimicry. Maybe just put a line or two in the chat about what biomimicry means to you. What does biomimicry mean to you? And thanks for the heads up that my slide was cut off, folks. Is that better now? Can you see it now? Great. Okay. A way to inspire young people with solution-based thinking, using nature as our guide to reimagine how we learn and live. Yeah, modeling human-created systems after natural cycles. Great. Yep. You can see what people are writing here. There's lots of different ways to define biomimicry, but you've got it. From a technology point of view, from a spiritual point of view, from a way we reorient ourselves. I think of it as turning to nature in a new way, more like a student turning to a teacher, which asks me to listen in a new way and tap into a kind of a gratitude and humility that's different than how I might normally do so. So again, I'm not a biologist, but I've been studying biology, and one of the things that I've learned is that all the species that have ever lived on Earth, only 1% still remains. The other 99% have either gone extinct or they've evolved into a new form. And what that means is that the species that are living now with us are the survivors. And they have honed themselves and the ways that they live together to thrive in the current conditions and the selection pressures of planet Earth now. So they have all kinds of things to teach us about being here for the long haul, about thriving. They have wisdom that they hold that we can get some value from. So if we're trying to understand how to survive here, working together to adapt and evolve amidst the existential threats of this time, why not turn to the planet herself for guidance? Why not tap into that 3.8 billion years of evolutionary intelligence? And that's what people are doing. And biomimicry has had a lot of uptake in the design and innovation world. Designers are asking questions. They're asking, well, how does nature do this thing that we're trying to do? So they're asking things like, how does nature move through water or air with less effort? And there was an inventor that noticed that humpback whales have bumps on the front end of their fins, which was curious to him. So he did a bunch more research, and he ended up inventing a wind blade for wind energy having bumps on the front, and it creates much more efficient electricity production. This is a company called Whale Power, right? This technology was also mimicked by Speedo. For human-powered movement through water, they created these swim fins called the Nemesis. I've got them, I love them. They work fast and efficient and with a lot less effort, just like the humpback whale. Designers are asking other questions. How does nature adhere without using toxic glues? And they've mimicked the feet of geckos to be able to stick without using chemicals. How does nature create vibrant colors without using toxic dyes? And the morpho butterfly is a teacher for us in that way. How does nature make energy from the sun the way a leaf does? And there's new models of solar energy that are based on photosynthesis. Really cool stuff. There are a lot of medical applications as well, and particularly recently, there's a lot of medical research asking, how does nature deal with viruses and other pathogens? You know, a lot of us know that the coronavirus came from bats, and people have kind of an ick factor with bats, but actually the bats can be our teacher, because they live with the coronavirus in their bodies without having that kind of overwhelming immune system response that is what goes on in us and makes us sick. So researchers are asking the bat, how does that happen? How do you live with a virus in your system and not have it take you down? I also learned about the one on the right. This is the clangor cicada. I learned about this in the ICP blog from Naima Temaile, that the clangor cicada have wings that destroy bacteria on contact. So that technology is being mimicked and used on surfaces in hospitals and in other places where we're trying to avoid pathogens and viruses spreading. This is the kind of thing that's been going on in biomimicry for quite a while, and it just keeps growing, and it's exciting, and it's a lot of the forefront of technology. But as I mentioned, I'm into the people side. Biomimicry for social innovation. We're asking questions like, how does nature self-organize? How can people come together without a lot of hierarchy when we need to come together quickly to respond to challenges? How does nature cooperate across difference to create situations where there's truly mutual benefit? How does nature exchange information to create new possibilities and spark things that didn't exist before? What can nature teach us through her evolutionary intelligence about resilience and regeneration? These are biomimicry questions too. And we're taking a kind of a systems view of biomimicry. This image is a body of work that was developed by colleagues and friends, a sister organization called Biomimicry 3.8. We could spend the whole webinar or weeks or months or a lifetime really studying life's principles. They've distilled this from the biological literature, 26 principles in 6 different pie shapes that are things that all organisms on Earth live by and embody. All organisms and all ecosystems. I call this the operating manual for being an earthling. If you live on Earth, you do these things. And in the center of it, if you kind of essentialize it all into the essence of what life does, this is a quote from Janine Benyus: life creates conditions conducive to life. And we can do that too. 26 principles is a lot. So at Biomimicry for Social Innovation, we have distilled this into a small set of leadership practices, essential lessons from nature that support our regenerative work, that support our leadership, our organizational work, our culture change. And I would say that these 6 practices are all contribute to positive peace building and to resilience. They're practices like cultivating cooperation, understanding how the vast web of mutualisms in nature work, and applying those practices to our own partnerships and networks. It turns out that even though this isn't what you see on the Nature Channel, cooperation is the most natural thing in the world. And the principles that are central to how migration, and we can practice those and learn from them. And in fact, at BSI, we did some work with an organization in Canada, a rainforest protection organization called Canopy, who works with supply chain executives from companies that use raw materials from tropical forests as their source matter. So they create paper and fabrics and clothing. And Canopy used these mutualism principles to join with them and build partnerships to shift them from being forest destroyers to being champions of forest health and protection. Another practice, feedback loops. Life runs on feedback and information, and we can build feedback loops into our own systems, so we're constantly learning, adjusting, self-regulating when disturbances come. Self-organization and emergence. In the natural world, there isn't somebody at the top who's directing things and planning and telling us when we need to shift and when we need to adapt and change. Nature does that through simple rules in a way that is elegant and in real time. Can we learn how to work together that way in community, in this kind of simple and aligned way, especially when the going gets tough? Another practice is maintaining integrity through self-renewal. Life has regenerative practices that are built into ecosystem dynamics, that have evolved that way over millions of years, that actually rely on disturbances and disruption for new cycles to begin. And we're going to go deeply into this in particular in just a minute. But before we do, I want to invite Daniel to speak to this a little bit. Daniel, anything I missed, anything else you would say about overviewing biomimicry, how it's relevant to you, how it's relevant to the people you work with?
Wow, thank you, Toby. It's a beautiful introduction. Even though I feel like I've heard you share these stories before, there's so much to learn every time you revisit these principles. So thank you for leading us through that introduction. A reflection, just really quickly, we are nature, and this is a remembering. Biomimicry is a remembering of who we are and how we fit in, and I think that's a really beautiful and important distinction. This isn't just about designing cooler products that we can sell more of, that we can manufacture more of, that we can run through the typical cycles. This is really asking ourselves, how do we fit? How do we fit in? And I think that fitting in piece, one thing I always like to talk about in regards to biomimicry is how are we connecting and reconnecting? How are we discovering nature and our place in it on a regular basis? And so whether you're a scientist, a designer, an educator, working in the political space, no matter what sectors you find yourself in, when is your time, that healing time for both you and nature, and that innovative time, that creative time that you get to spend in deep connection and collaboration with nature. And I make sure, here in Hawaii, those of us who are in Hawaii, incredibly lucky, but everywhere you go around the world, there's just remarkable things happening all around us outside. And so taking the time to get outside feels so important. And for me, biomimicry is really derived from, speaking to the remembering, it's really derived from a life-centered value system that serves as an invitation to see the rest of the natural world in ways that are healing to both me and the planet. It's a value system that seems to resonate with the value systems I'm learning from my Hawaiian and other indigenous friends. And it's this life-centered value system and the design practice that it inspires that really highlights for me the connection between climate and peace. It feels like we're only really ever going to be successful in addressing all of these challenges that Toby mentioned in the beginning, this confluence of all these challenges posed by climate change and other things, by really embracing the importance and interconnectedness of all of life. I like how you said it, Toby, that the Discovery Channel might not show us nature in cooperation because it doesn't produce the drama that so many of us love to watch on television, but it really is how nature works and how we're designed to work. So other than that, for me, I like to remember nature is even more than just a teacher. Within biomimicry, we talk about nature as model, mentor, and measure. And it's this measure element that I think is really important, that nature, science and indigenous practices and ways of knowing, traditional ecological knowledge, have been collecting data and surveying the performance of our ecosystems for a long time. Hundreds of years in the Western world and thousands of years in the indigenous world. And we have these ecological performance standards that offer us real bottom lines, right? Really tell us what we need to do to thrive. And so using biomimicry as a evaluation tool, you know, how are we doing? Well, let's look at our surrounding ecosystems and ask ourselves, how are they doing and are we measuring up? And so, you know, I really like to think of nature as that measure. You know, that's my goal. I'm doing my best to strive to fit in and perform as well as those surrounding environments. Both biomimicry and the Hawaiian culture have really invited me to look back while looking forward, right? Really offering a way that I can connect in this moment, a deep past and an incredible future, really for regeneration through reciprocal relationships. And so I know biomimicry has so much to learn from Hawaii and the genius of this place. And I'm really looking forward to exploring that a little bit further later on as we get to dive into some of the things offered here locally in Hawaii. But yeah, mahalo, Toby, that's all. Thank you for your introduction.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to put a question in the chat here and encourage you to put some thoughts in the chat. As you've been listening to this about an overview of biomimicry and hearing Daniel's reflections about how it connects with traditional ecological knowledge and Hawaii, what are you seeing? What's sparking in your mind about nature's intelligence as a resource for social change, environmental justice, climate change? What are you seeing? Deb says reconnection. Yeah, there's a big piece there. What else? Just love to hear, as you're listening, what's coming up for you? What ideas are sparking? Yeah, you can see what people are pointing to here. Resiliency. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Positive redundancy. Peace building. Nature and peace building, how do those go together? Well, maybe actually they do. Maybe there's some things to learn from nature about how to all live together on this planet without killing each other. Maybe there's a way to do that. Connecting and reconnecting. Yeah. Collaboration and strength. Great. I'm going to let you keep putting things in there, and we'll be circling back to the chat in a bit. Shall I show some more pictures here? Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. So, partnering with life in these times has a lot to do with navigating disruption, as we've been mentioning. I like to think of disruption as the divine hand of regeneration, because it's actually the disturbances that create that new cycle. Many of you live in Hawaii, and from this place, we learn about Pele's hand in literally building new lands as she destroys what was there before. And I live in the continental West, where we're having devastating wildfires. And these are really a catastrophic expression of what happens in a natural system when it's gone as far as it can go, when the system is overloaded and something needs to change. A lot of these systems haven't seen wildfire in 100 years, and now we're getting so much of it. I would suggest that the same is true of many of our political and economic systems and many of the structures of modern culture, that they've gone as far as they can go, and things are a little bound up. And what's happening is that a lot of embodied energy has been holding the system in place, but it's kind of stuck. And then when a fire comes through, or the flood, or the typhoon, that which has been bound up, it gets redistributed and dispersed. And the energy and the nutrients become available to help other things emerge and grow. This is what happens in nature. A new regenerative process starts. So after a fire in the mountains near me, right up over my shoulder here, the landscape immediately starts to heal itself. First with these species that grow quickly. This is called fireweed. They love the sun. They produce lots of seeds. And then more complex Shrubs and tree communities begin to move in. These are aspens. They come back from an underground connected root system, and they grow quickly with all this exposed sudden light availability. They grow really quickly, and they hold and prepare the soils. And then they support other plants and other organisms that increase the soil fertility. And eventually, slowly, the slow-moving pines and other conifers start to grow in. And you see a landscape like this. This is what's happening right now in the mountains above where I live. It's fall, and the aspen trees turn golden, and they're going to drop their leaves and begin go through a seasonal cycle change, at the same time that there's a longer-term cycle change of these slow-growing trees that needed the shade and the protection that the aspens gave them in order to come back. So each successive set of ecosystem members prepares the ground for the next set of species, changing the conditions so they're just right for what's to come, even though it's no longer as well suited for themselves. I think there's a deep teaching in that. How can we apply that learning to our own institutions, to our own companies, even in some ways to our own community leadership? There's a lot to learn there. So I've been talking about the West. In Hawaii, you have similar successionary processes, but it happens with lava. Instead of underground root systems, you have the kipuka, these islands of life that provide fertility and nourishment to begin the cycle again. Each stage preparing the ground for what comes next. And these adaptive natural cycles, they can be teachers for us in our social systems as well. There's a lot that needs to break down. There's a lot that needs to begin again. New systems, structures that can maybe be more life affirming by nature. That's what we're trying to explore here. And as you all know well, the impacts of climate change are demanding that we think differently about how to come together in new ways and rebuild the structures of our society. And as a global community, we're beginning to envision what that might look like. How we create conditions conducive to life. What the future cities might look like, where we can be together in cities and be creating conditions conducive to life. And within the ecological richness of the Hawaiian Islands, huge opportunity to showcase human and natural coevolution. Daniel, I'm going to ask you to speak to this. I'm going to see if I can get the word right, the ahupua'a. Can you tell the group a little bit about what these pictures are pointing toward?
Yeah, thank you, Toby. And well done on your pronunciation. I'm still working on my Hawaiian pronunciation after several years. So, the living genius of the planet really converges on this dynamic point on this map, right? On if it makes the map at all. Many world maps, struggle to even show the Hawaiian Islands traditional projections. But this scattering of small dots that's stretching for thousands of miles across the middle of the planet's largest ocean, seemingly isolated, actually contains over 2/3 of the Holdridge life zones, right? There is ecological abundance in just steps from each other. On one walk to the back of this valley, this photo is from the back of New Valley on the southern coast of Oahu. You encounter so many different landscapes, so many different kinds of terrain, so many different habitats, and so much biological, ecological genius, and a cultural genius that was created by the Polynesians over 1,000 years of time to work in partnership and collaboration and cooperation with that dynamic ecosystem, right? From the tops of sacred Mauna to the depths of the ocean, they're all here in such a small space. And so the ahupua'a offers us not just a geographical, geological, ecological lesson, but really a lesson in how you can learn from the genius of your place and co-evolve with that place and really give it form that regenerates it and makes it resilient. And so the Polynesians organized themselves culturally to match the lessons of the land, from the very tops of the ridge of the mountains to the edges of the reef and beyond. And that organization led over time to this concept of ahupua'a, which is a primarily local, decentralized, modular, and nested economic, social, political, and cultural reality. It's not just a biological, ecological reality. It became part of the way of life for all of the humans who lived here, to live in collaboration with the rest of life, creating the conditions truly conducive to life. Well, that's a model for the world. Dr. Sam Gon and Dr. Kavika Winter, two of our respected scientists here in Hawaii, have written about how this could be a model for the rest of the world to learn from. So for those of us in Hawaii, we have such this unique gift of, and many places around the world too, especially where there's, you know, strong connections to an indigenous presence and way of being and living on the land, similar lessons are learned. So how do we tap into this true genius of place, right? It's a phrase that we often use in biomimicry to talk about the capacity for a particular ecosystem to thrive through mutualism and interdependence. And how can we generate a scientific, a very observation-based, right? We call it kilo in Hawaii, a kilo-based understanding of how to fit into that landscape, and how to match those ecological performance standards of the ahupua'a that were built by the ancestors who co-evolved with this land. And how can we return to that concept and create the next iteration of Hawaii that really truly honors the ingenuity and innovation embedded into the concept of ahupua'a, tap into the genius of place and the genius of our ancestors of this place. So yeah, mahalo, Toby. I think that's all I have for that, but I could speak for a long time about it. I get excited, but I think we have so much to learn from the amazing things that have happened and are continuing to happen here in Hawaii.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much. Mahalo, as you say. And I think it's important to remember that this coevolution is not static. This is an image from ecology. Deb's excited about this as an ecologist. This is called the adaptive cycle. This is a regenerative pattern that we can recognize. It describes how change happens in ecosystems. I think it also how change happens in social systems. I'm curious, can you see my cursor on the slide? So there's a growth stage where there's expansion, experimentation, rapid growth, like that fireweed. It starts coming up. They call it exploitation because it's exploiting new resources. Oops. But as it continues, eventually there's maturity and there's equilibrium and stability in that system, but systems can become rigid, stagnant, and bound up, maybe vulnerable to disturbance. Outside disturbance comes, and there's a kind of a collapse of the system, but it also releases that energy. This is what happens with the fire. That energy is freed up. And then there's a kind of an opportunity for reorientation, reorganization, reconnection. And then new futures emerge and start to take shape, and the cycle begins again. So it keeps going like this. This is how it happens in the natural world. And when we understand it and think about our social systems through that lens, then we can work with these dynamics. How'd I do, Deb? Pretty good. Okay, great. So I want to introduce one more set of life's practices, which is about embodying resilience. Because when these systems are going through their changes, we don't want everything to fail. We don't want to lose everything. We want to build some resiliency into our systems around things, those things that are most important. That's like the core DNA of who we are. We don't want to lose that. And life builds resilience into organisms and ecosystems in order to, maintain function, following the disturbances. And I call it the 3Ds. These 3Ds, diversity, duplication, and decentralization. In biological terms, duplication is often called redundancy. So let's just like unpack this just a little bit. Because natural selection has codified these qualities into the resiliency that are in ecosystems and organizations all around us. If you didn't have these characteristics, you wouldn't have the ability to bounce back. And these characteristics live in our own human immune system, which is what actually keeps us healthy and safe when we've been infected or fighting off sickness. The white blood cells are the champions of resilience in our body. So diversity, we have 5 different types of white blood cells so that they can respond to intruders in a variety of ways. We don't know who's going to intrude, so we have to be prepared for that. There's duplication or redundancy, many of each type. So there's backup systems to ensure functioning. If the first attempt fails or gets knocked out, there's more ready. There's redundancy in the system. And then there's decentralization. These white blood cells, they wait poised for duty, distributed in many different places in our body. So life is doing this constantly, creating extra protections and backup plans for those things that matter most. Our immune system, spread out across the system, and yet connected as a system. And life has evolved this specifically to deal with likely but unpredictable threats. It's not a very efficient system. 5 different kinds spread out all over, so many. It's not an efficient system, but it's a very resilient system. And those tend to be on a spectrum. I think that our human systems, most of which were designed in the industrial age, and our economies, have mostly been built for efficiency. So we don't always have the resiliency built in. And at times like this, when we're going through so much disruption, resiliency becomes extra important. We don't have millions of years of evolution to redesign our human systems. Climate science is telling us we have maybe 8 to 10 years. But what we do have is these big forebrains. And we can learn from those, we can iterate, we can learn from the natural mentors of other organisms and ecosystems, and we can learn from the traditional human folks who came before us as well. We can design resiliency into our systems, our food and ag systems, the ways we build our organizations, our economic systems, healthcare systems, how we respond as a community in the face of climate disruption. These are things that we can design into our systems. So I'm wondering, can we use this pandemic time to pause and to become more localized and more collaborative in our community design efforts and agree on what is most essential to retain as conditions change? That's the first step. What do we most need to retain? And I just want to acknowledge that COVID and the wildfires and the lava flows, the social challenges, there's been a lot going on. And I think that many communities, particularly more marginalized communities and communities of color and indigenous communities, know about resiliency. Probably many people in this virtual room have had their resiliency tested and grown because we're going through these things. So we are resilient and we bounce back. And particularly those folks who are more exposed to the kind of challenges of our life. We have this in us. And this is a time when we can be even more purposeful about applying those into how we redesign our systems. So just a little bit more about resiliency. The actual definition, the biological definition, is the ability to go through disruption, adapt to change, and bounce back, retaining the essential functioning and identity. It's for the bio geeks out there. And there's been some recent work translating nature's intelligence, the biological understanding of resiliency, into applications for these systems where humans and ecology come together, the socio-ecological systems. And they've identified a set of 7 principles for building resilience into our systems. And these are those 7 principles. I'm not going to go into each of them, but I've cited the reference on the bottom, and you will get the slides to this presentation, so you can look this up later. But you see the diversity, redundancy, connectivity. Those are the 3 Ds. And then there's some other things in here about what we need to pay attention to as systems in order to design in ways that build resiliency into the system, so we can keep the ecological services functioning and we can keep the human and cultural systems intact and functioning as well. And if you have questions about any of this, we can go deeper into it in the Q&A. I want to also suggest, particularly to the ICP community, I think these are the how-to ingredients inspired by nature for generating positive peace, for designing communities that are 3D resilient, right? The 3Ds are kind of a handy way of remembering it, a much deeper, more complex understanding. Can we design communities that are resilient in their diversity, in their redundancy, in the decentralization and connectivity, so that we can bounce back when climate disruption hits? or maybe even bounce forward. Because the reality is that interacting with disturbances in our environment in a collaborative way makes us stronger and better adapted for what is to come, just like in nature. So I'm curious about how you're seeing these principles being practiced. And if this is sparking things in you, please put some ideas in the chat. But I'm actually going to pass back to Daniel because I want to surface some stories of specific ways in Hawaii that these things are being practiced, that there are efforts underway already going on that we want to highlight, we want to applaud. So we'll take another 10, 15 minutes to share some of those stories. And then we're going to open up for some dialogue, for some conversation, for some learning among all of you. So Daniel, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you to share your screen.
Thank you, Toby. Is that working? Can you see that?
Looks great.
I want to start by saying that there are so many amazing things happening in Hawaii. So I'm here to share the few that I'm able to connect with on a regular basis and that I know the most about. But I also want to encourage everyone within the context of your place in these islands, if you live here, or even if you don't, in the context of your community and your neighborhood. I know that there are amazing examples of networked, decentralized community collaborations that are responding to address COVID, climate change, and many other crises where our centralized efforts to attend to those issues are maybe failing. But the communities are demonstrating resilience, and Hawaii is, again, just a remarkable example. I want to share a story about some people in these images. In both of these images, you see a gentleman named Dr. John Francis, and he's another one of my teachers. He's sometimes known as the Planet Walker. We spent a few years working with students in China and taking long walks where the focus was close observation of both our internal worlds and external worlds. And I didn't really know about biomimicry at the time, but John's central message is we are the environment. When I found out about Hokulea and decided that I wanted to move here to Oahu and be a part of this community, almost instantly, Nainoa Thompson, who many of us will know, became a teacher. And actually there was an event about 2.5 years ago. I saw Maya here in the chat, one of the founders and leaders and one of our favorite people here in the community in Hawaii and beyond, facilitated a great conversation between John and Nainoa, and I watched them becoming like brothers from across oceans, right? As they met for the first time and shared stories. And this was really an important moment for me, where I began to see Hawaii as a classroom. I began to see the Aina and the ocean here as something to learn from, not just a space to learn in, but something to learn from. And I began to look at our environment a little bit more carefully and see myself as part of the land. So I just wanted to mahalo John for all the teaching he's offered me and friendship and collaboration, and also Nainoa and now the entire Ohana Va'a. They also inspired a walk I did last year with my own 2 kids, plus miles, to reunite with my place here on Oahu and my extended island Ohana, and to bring my kids along for the ride. This is us out on the that you can find pretty regularly along the Kaiwi coastline, right in the intertidal zone. And these urchin, along with starfish and a few other echinoderms, move around by feet, but they attach themselves in these very precarious places, places that would be very difficult for us to hold on, as well as algae and other marine life, that really allow for just an incredible distributed way of staying connected and staying attached. And so that distributed mechanism is really phenomenal. And it reminds me of the work that we do on the canoe. We're currently engaged in relashing hokulea, tied together with 6 miles of line, 6 miles of rope. And so I think of the lessons and examples, both literal and metaphorical lessons, that the urchins and other marine life can provide, and lots of life here on the islands can provide, and the connections that our ancestors made between how those organisms survived and thrived here and how we might learn from them. So I also want to highlight another example. Again, lashing is a common theme. Here we're learning how to build a hale. And actually, I think a couple of people on the call might actually show up in this photograph. And we can see again that it's a cooperative, networked approach that is helping to produce success. It's producing resilience and regeneration in our community. And it was a focus of a program that this image was taken as part of called Kamaka Inana. And so I wanted to highlight Kamaka Inana because the program is actually starting again in just a couple of weeks. And we're currently through Purple Maya Foundation in partnership with University of Hawaii, Office of Indigenous Innovation and Office of Sustainability, have created a really amazing program, and biomimicry is at the heart of that program. So I wanted to point that out. I'll share a little bit more information about that in just a second. But for those of you looking for ways to connect to this conversation in other places in our community here in Hawaii, this is an example. You'll notice that from across the island, we have so many different organizations, what I'll call the Malama movement. This is a photo from Malama Maunalua, but Malama means to care for. And every ahupua'a, every community, it seems, has a group that's dedicated to caring for that space and taking care of that environment and that landscape and the people that make up that landscape. And so I just want to highlight that that's another opportunity to focus local, to engage with local, distributed, decentralized networks of people working to care for their environments. I also wanted to share that this is a screenshot from a website called Homai Kapono. And it has really been my nudge into a kilo practice, into a practice of paying deeper attention, following the moon and paying attention to the tides, paying attention to the transition of the sun across the sky, something that culturally the ancestors had to do in order to thrive here. And that I think we can invite the lessons in timing and seasonality and patterns of change back into our lives, and acknowledge that makahiki here in Hawaii is starting again soon. So how do we embrace that? I also wanted to bring up just a couple of other things relating back to that Malama movement and Malama Maunalua. Some of the lessons that I've learned is that land is family and that land has a memory, right? And that we are a part of the genius of that place. So if I go back to the slide, that we do belong there. We belong outside. We belong in our nearshore ecosystems. We belong in our forests and in our streams, in our fish ponds. These are places where we're meant to be and that we can serve a vital purpose in the ecosystem. And my work with Malama Maunalua also taught me another interesting lesson about embracing the new DNA, right? Hawaii has always been populated by the wind, by sea, sometimes on accident. It's been populated by DNA arriving into the ecosystem, and it's had to figure out how to incorporate that DNA into the ecosystem. And so how can we do that both literally and figuratively? Brother Cliff Kapono, who many of you will know, an amazing scientist, also an amazing surfer, a young Kanaka leader in the community. We spoke a few weeks ago as part of a foundation program, and he said, Hawaiians understand that we is changing. Just because we have COVID and climate change and the fires right now, we've lived through thousands of years of cycles and patterns of change and surprising disruptive events. We are conditioned for resilience, and we just have to remember that. As Toby reminded us early on, that's really just a remembering. So yeah, it was another cool lesson. One of the other things I wanted to share, this was more recent. My children and I were out exploring a spot that we're currently investing more time in along the Kaiwi coast. And we came across all of these crabs, or actually crab molts. So my kids were a bit nervous when I said, hey, why don't you pick it up? And they said, but Daddy, it might pinch us. And I said, no, I don't think it's gonna pinch you. And they said, Daddy, is it dead? I said, no, it's not dead, right? These crab molts are what is left over when a crab has to grow. When it's time for a crab to change, they have to work their way out of this amazingly constructed exoskeleton and go through an incredibly vulnerable stage to find their new future, to grow their new future. And I think it's often letting go. It's shedding our old skeletons and our old ways of being and doing things that is really hard. So not only, as Toby reminded us, do we have to identify that DNA that we want to hold on to, that we want to protect in the kipuka, but also what is it time to let go of? What can we let go of? And love learning that, watching my own kids as they grow up and have to embrace those same lessons for themselves. What are they having to let go of and retain? We had an amazing article come out earlier this summer, I think by some of the people on this call, called Transforming the Economy Through Ocean, Ohia, and Ohana. These are those ecological performance standards that I referenced earlier. We have people in Hawaii who are working on figuring out how to orient our social, political, cultural systems towards protecting nature and protecting community. A couple of examples again, I really encourage people to identify the Malama group in their community, in their neighborhood. Of course, encourage people who live in the area to come join Malama Manalua's Huki events when they're able to start again post-COVID. I also wanted to highlight the Kamaka Inana and New Futures programs as applications are open, and an incredible opportunity. I'm going to be joining a team reimagining education as part of Designing a Stronger Tomorrow, a program that's offered through Seeds of Peace, who also, which is also founded and led by Maya, or formerly led by Maya, although I know she's going to be a big part of this Designing a Stronger Tomorrow program and still is a big part of what Seeds of Peace is doing. So we can throw links to this into the chat and in the follow-up email to this event. But I just wanted to highlight so many things that are happening in Hawaii that really we can embrace. We can dive into this conversation even further. It doesn't have to stop here. I also wanted, this might be a little strange, but I really wanted to throw out a recommendation. If you have I know a lot of us are at home and on Netflix. If you have an hour and a half and want to watch this film, My Octopus Teacher, it really blew my mind. Craig Foster, who's featured in the film, he's the co-star along with the octopus in this documentary film. He is a friend of Hokulea. Hokulea stopped in False Bay as part of Worldwide Voyage, and our leadership was able to sit down with Craig. And it really is just a remarkable story that I think could serve as an example for all of us as to how we might reconnect and engage with the lessons that our environments have to teach us. I also wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the Mimicry Institute is doing in Biomimicry 3.8 in collaboration with Arizona State University. I think I saw Amanda Ellis, representative of Arizona State University, and their sustainability programs and center. But this online degree in biomimicry has been transformative and a pathway into the biomimicry professional program. The Ask Nature website is a really amazing resource if you just want to start going through a search engine that features all of the amazing ways that, not all, but many of the amazing ways that nature is solving interesting challenges that we could use help with. And I think, oh, I did see Sam on the call. I definitely wanted to, Sam Chaltain and his colleague, Trung Lee, have put together an amazing resource. You should definitely sign up to get a copy. Seed and Spark is going to be a remarkable book. I've gotten a preview. Sam, if you're still with us out late, I hope it's Pauhana happy hour time there on the East Coast. Thank you for staying with us. But Sam and Lee's book is going to be an incredible story of how nature and the lessons from nature can help us reimagine education, which is of course really near and dear to my heart. I've been working over the last year and a half to grow Pacific Blue Studios, a network of these youth-powered studios that are really focused on bringing biomimicry and indigenous innovation into the lives of young people in collaboration with community partners. So if you are a young person or a parent of a young person or a school or a community-based organization who feels mission aligned or wants to tap into biomimicry and the creative energies that that our young people bring into the space and use Hawaii as our teacher and classroom, or listen to Hawaii as our teacher and as our classroom, please feel free to reach out to me about that. And last, but certainly not least, resilience and regeneration requires participation. Probably the most biomimetic thing you can do in the next couple of weeks is to vote. And this from last year, opening day of the legislature, I bet many of you were there and remember it. If you're here in Hawaii, it was an incredible and inspiring celebration of the incredible power that lives in our collective intelligence and influence here in the land. The Aina was represented, nature was well represented at that space, and it was a big moment for the legislature. I know things are different with COVID this year, but I also know that many of you on the call are already looking for ways to stay actively engaged in building our resilient and regenerative community through all the processes that are available. So mahalo to everyone. I hope I sparked some interest in a few of these different ways to connect locally here in Hawaii. I think there's a lot that we can do together. I am considering and hoping to do another walk in the season of Makahiki around the island, and if we can find ways to do it safely and do it together, I'd love to hear from you if you're interested in that as well. So mahalo nui, and I'm going to pass back over to Toby.
Thank you, Daniel. That was just beautiful. And if you haven't noticed yet, folks, especially folks that are in the Hawaii community, Daniel is a beautiful connecting point of, he's a really important node in the network there around culture and land and community and education and young people and nature. So please seek him out, get to know him. Pacific Blue Studios is a relatively new venture, and I really want to encourage y'all to support Daniel and support the work and get involved. He's doing such cool stuff. 20 minutes left, and we want to open this up to more of a dialogue, which is always challenging with 75 people, but not impossible. And I think that we want to hear your voices out loud, and we also are continuing to invite chat comments. I think that with 75 people, the best way to kind of manage a conversation is to remember that there are 75 people. So please be, you know, succinct and bring yourself fully to your comments in a way that allows time for other people. And we will look at hands raised. And the way that you raise your hands is if you bring your cursor again down to the bottom navigation bar where the chat is, you'll see something that says participants. And when you open that screen up, you can find your own name, and you can raise your hand, and we will call on you. But so we're going to have some Q&A, and we'd actually like to start with some questions to you instead of your questions to us, although we'll get to that too. So we'd love to hear from a few among the crowd, again, either by voice or by chat, about what are some aspects of your own projects and your own practices, your own efforts, where you see you could apply these ideas from nature. These resilience protocols, these regenerative, adaptive cycle ideas. You could think about things differently, you could work together in a different way, or you could build structures in a different way. Let's see if folks have something to say about that. And if you'd like to speak into the group, please raise your hand, and I'm scanning to see whose hands are raised. And if you'd like to write something in the chat, that works too. What are, I'll say the question again. In fact, maybe I'm even just going to put this question into the chat. See if I can do that.
Toby, Lori Wallace made a poignant comment about coaching people through change and crisis, specifically after being laid off. Hawaii is, like many other places, but perhaps especially so, been hit by the economic impacts of COVID and the, diminished opportunities for resource and tourism and other industries that are really important for the state. And so how do we support those who have, currently entered this crisis and then been hit with another crisis and lost job opportunities or things like that?
And Lori, I know you've designed a practice that really is very nature inspired. Would you unmute yourself and just speak for a minute or two about, I know that you could probably talk for an hour about it, but we'd love to hear just the essence of what you're seeing out there and how people are finding ways to take that energy and reorganize it as part of that adaptive cycle.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, ever so briefly, I've been a recruiter since 2003, so I talk to a lot of people when they're quite devastated through either a toxic boss or being laid off. And I finally decided this year that I wanted to support these people, but I wanted it to be deep. So I call it kind of more depth mentoring. And so created almost an initiation rite to embrace career change as a gateway to wholeness. And the best way to do that, to get past defenses and to inspire the fact that this change is an opening actually to something evolutionary for them, where they can shed social conditioning and really be themselves, is through the animals. And it's funny, I've been making notes about adding crab to it because we start off with snake and very much with shedding and coming into reality. And then chrysalis, obviously dropping into stillness, coming back into heart intelligence, coming in into, your own world as a kingdom, kind of your heart in the lead. And then wolf, for understanding your ecosystem and how to keep that in balance and howl at the moon and be seen and be safe. And then ultimately the bee for coming into its landscape. And I'm finding that this poetic form, while we bring in the biology to, and I say, look what the snake's doing. It's rubbing up against a sharp rock to split its skin so that it can grow and not choke. How is this job even potentially choking you? And almost 99% said I was going to quit anyways in some cases. So it's turning out to be very poetic. I think it came up in this call that we are speaking to a soul aspect, which Hawaii is just where nature is most so happy. And so, everybody feels it when we go there. And I think touching people's souls, nature allows that soul arousal and the heart arousal. And I think both heart and soul have just been dormant, so it's pretty exciting. It's fun to do. And I get to touch the animals every day. So it's fun.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lori.
Thank you.
Good. Anybody else have stories to share or examples or things you're working with, ways that you're applying or could apply or feel now inspired to apply these lessons about regeneration and resilience into your own work, into your own communities?
Hi, Toby.
Hi, Flavia.
Daniel. Okay. So I have a few comments about regeneration. So first of all, I live in California, and I have experienced not only the disruption of COVID, but also the big fires. And there was a day where the sky was orange all day and it looked like an eclipse, apocalyptic. So I remember that image of the pink flowers you showed us today, Toby, as I truly believe in the moment of biggest crisis and disruption, the most amazing beauty emerges. And nature for me is a continuum and is that place where I go to find this energy. And on a particular experience personally following what Lori said, I have been laid off. I am in the Biomimicry program and I needed this time to really regenerate, think about resources and reconnect to the world, the people, the beauty of life, and value time. I believe time is a very limited resource, but this time gave me the opportunity to launch my own design firm. Who knows where that's gonna go, but it's called Life Positive Design and connects retail. That's what I do with biomimicry. And I think this is a hopefully a good story of resilience and regeneration and connecting some dots, and I feel good about it. So I hope to walk with you, Daniel, one of these days. This is a dream of my life. It's not gonna happen this year. And I say, well, thank you. I just say thank you. Grazie in my language.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I
There's a
can't
question.
I
I'm
can't
sorry.
wait in Flavia, by the way. It'll happen one time. Eventually, we're just going to make it happen.
Let's take one more story from the field about how you're seeing you can apply these principles to your own work, or you already are.
I'll also, while we wait for someone who wants to share, I'll also point your direction to the chat, where I just noticed some really great insights in people sharing their stories in chat. So mahalo for that.
Hello. Yeah, somebody said I should just go for it.
Hi, Randy. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up.
Yeah. So just real quickly, I'm working on understanding levels of harm, and paths for connecting with spirit wisdoms, finding and cultivating centering processes within that. So if other folks might be interested in joining me in that dialogue, I'd appreciate hearing from you. You can just reach out to me in the chat here, if that's okay with you. Yes.
Great. No, this is a place for networking. Thank you. Sayer, I see your hand up.
I was just going to offer that I've been surprised. I've been doing some org development consulting with an economic justice organization in New Jersey. And 5 years old, 5-year-old organization happening, at the same time as COVID. So both of these things happening at this milestone of 5 years and what comes with that, plus COVID and the pandemic. And I haven't even gone very deep yet, but even giving people the opportunity to talk about their relationship with nature and a vision that we're going to learn from nature as part of resiliency has added some energy to the life of the organization. And we haven't even really started doing our work together. And so it's been really surprising to me that you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be certified. You don't have to have a degree. It's really just reminding people about their own relationship with nature and what that teaches them, what that gives to them, that gives them some more, energy, breath, life, space. It's been a good lesson for me the last couple of weeks.
Thank you, Sayer. Yeah, and as Lori pointed out earlier too, there's something about when we start to recognize that we can bring nature in as our inspiration for the parts of our life that we didn't think had nature in them. And it evokes that awe. It evokes that sense of being connected to something larger and something beautiful and something intrinsically connected to the whole that I think actually has a neurological response in us. And there's a enzymatic, I might get this wrong, but there's something called, it's like an enzyme that gets secreted when we are in an experience of awe that actually reduces inflammation. So there's a direct biological relationship with connecting to these larger sources of inspiration. And nature is all about that. Yeah. Let's hear if there's questions from you all. What would you like any kind of dialogue about? Anything you want to follow up with Daniel about, or any questions you have for me? I see a long text from Maya and I'm scanning it. I have a thing, my brain doesn't do a Zoom output and Zoom input very well together. So love for you to unmute yourself and speak into the group. I think you're a leader in this community. We'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Well, listen, I'm so grateful to you, Toby, and to you, Dan, and to the many people here. It's fun to see so many friends and extended family members here. And as I said in my chat, I'm taking lots of notes. I was just noting in my chat that this is so useful in work and in you know, as we consider how to build, I think, a certain level of optimism. Those of us who are trying to impact positively the climate crisis, or consider, as Maxine is doing, a pivot to sort of climate repair, are really buoyed by many of these examples and these efforts, because they are shared with a strength-based approach, and enable us to recognize the many resources that we have in our community, in our Kanaka culture, but in other community spaces all around the world, and in the people with whom we are sharing these efforts and endeavors. In the chat, I was mentioning, just on a personal level, I have lately been studying very slowly for sort of Zen leadership and practice. And I was noting that biomimicry has actually been a very useful lens by which I have taken a look at interbeing, Thich Nhat Hanh's concept of inner being. And I was just commenting on, you think about the soil and its many microorganisms, and how that perfect ecosystem reveals so much about interbeing, and those the forests, so remarkable when the leaves fall, and how the fungi and the microorganisms break that down, and then how it sort of returns to feed the forest after everything has been broken down, or how a seed destroys itself so completely in order to be reborn and to nourish and to grow. And I was just thinking how that is a big part of what gives me hope in the face of an imperiled world. So long text, even longer yapping. Thank you so much for all of you, who are here today.
Very good. Thank you so much, Maya. And thank you to both you and Maxine for starting the Institute for Climate and Peace. It's really such innovative, forward-looking work to combine peace building and addressing climate change in the whole frame of positive peace. It's just been such an inspiration to me. And you and Maxine are just such great leaders in that way. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I see a couple of hands up, and I want to call on you all. And I also noticed that we're close to the end of the time that we had allotted. I'm happy to stay on longer. Daniel, are you happy to stay on a bit longer too? But I know that there may be some folks who need to drop. So before we do, and I'll circle back around, Lily and Monica, you've got hands up. I just want to share a couple of other images in case folks want to know. Oh, I have all these slides we didn't show. In case folks want to know a couple things. One way that if you want to kind of get an instant dive into some biomimicry inspiration, this is a tool that I created called Life's Principles Leadership Cards. There's a deck of cards that looks like this, and the cards themselves, there's an image there, that are small teachings from the natural world of organisms who are mentors who illustrate the 26 life's principles. And then it's framed in terms of leadership and the kinds of social innovation that we're talking about here. And it asks you a provocative question. It's a great tool for your own biological learning. It's a great tool for making that bridge between the biology and the change making that you're wanting to do. And they're fun to play with, and you can use them in groups, and you can use them with friends, and they make great holiday presents. So I just wanted to put this link up here in case you're interested. You can order those cards. It's $20 a deck, and we'll get them out to you. And I also just wanted to put this up. If you want to be in touch with me, if you want to be in touch with Daniel, please do. please reach out and you can learn more about our work. We're happy to be in touch with you. I do promise to go through the chat and see your questions and thoughts and ideas that folks put forward. We will be sending out the recording and the slides. I saw in the chat, Daniel, somebody asked about would your slides be available to be sent as well? I think we'll send a PDF so you can have those images. Please don't use our slides in other places because this is, this is work. But we would love for you to learn from them and share them and pass the learning around. So anything else that you want to say, Daniel, before people drop?
Just a reminder for those of us here in Hawaii and elsewhere, especially I think most people on the call, if not all, are from the Northern Hemisphere. But we are entering into winter and here in Hawaii into Makahiki, and the cultural things that go along with that change in season are really born out of nature. There's a function and purpose there. And so I invite all of us to sort of take some time to consider how we'll use this time. As Flavia mentioned, we're going into a literal and potentially metaphorical season of regeneration and renewal. And many of us I know can use that moment and can find some solace in knowing that that's what this season is for. It's what that's why nature operates the way that it does. So yeah, let's remember and participate fully, but participate in the ways that regenerate and renew our spirits. So that's all from me, and thank you to everyone. I'm excited to stay on and hear a few more questions and continue the conversation. And if you do have to go, of course, we understand everybody's very busy. So mahalo for being with us today.
Thank you so much for all that you do to share and the work that you do with even very young children on our island and in our community. It's so vital that they have that nuanced appreciation and understanding and feel that connection really early on. So thank you to all of you educators.
I also want to just lift up that Zelda wrote in the chat to everybody who joined today to learn more about ICP and make a donation. This was offered free. This is a nonprofit that needs to support itself as well. Please visit our website, www.climateandpeace.org. Great. So to those who do need to drop, thank you so much. To those who can stay, let's stay for a while. Lily, I've seen your hand up for a bit of time. Could you unmute yourself and bring your voice into this community?
Yeah, of course. Hi, thank you so much, Toby and Daniel, for being here, and to my ICP family. Hi, I miss you guys and love you. Hey, Maya, I see you. I just was wondering how people can become further engaged with biomimicry and with your work.
Great. Daniel, why don't you start in terms of the local connection? Because the time will come when people come back together, I hope, on the Hawaiian Islands, and then I'll share a few additional things from Biomimicry for Social Innovation.
I know, absolutely. Thank you, Toby, and thanks for asking, Lily. I believe I saw that you were a part of the ICP team, but are no longer in Hawaii. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. I am currently living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So it's a little colder than where everyone else is. And we have snow on the ground right now, which is a little bit. So I'm jealous of the weather over there.
It's coming, get ready. But it's, I really will recommend, I have to compliment Biomimicry Institute, Biomimicry 3.8. Those organizations, partner organizations, or sister organizations founded by Janine Benyus and Dana Baumeister and Toby's organization, Biomimicry for Social Innovation. Their newsletters, the resources they put out, the webinars that they're putting out online, they're all outstanding. Toby is an incredible program I haven't been able to attend, but I've heard from many people who have, specifically geared for women and living systems leadership. And so there's just those sources there are outstanding. A more technical, education in biomimicry is available through some universities, but the one that really did it first and that has the most comprehensive program in partnership with Dana Baumeister and Biomimicry 3.8 is Arizona State University. And that's offered entirely online with the option to participate in a program that creates in-person immersions. And so that, I can't speak highly enough about the impact that that education and experience, and most importantly, community, has had on my life. And so biomimicry really comes to life in all its forms in that program, both in the technical product development innovation space, but also in the ethos and reconnection space, and the social innovation and culture building space as well. So, Arizona State is a good place to start. But biomimicry, there are various biomimicry groups, regional groups typically, that have a focus. I don't know the ones that are I know there's one in the Great Lakes region, and I know that there are some friends on this call who participate in that, but I'm sure you could search that up. And then, yeah, I don't know if you are coming back to Hawaii. The work I've been able to do with Purple Maya Foundation is really moving in that direction. The University of Hawaii has an Office of Sustainability and Office of Indigenous Innovation. How cool is that? Office of Indigenous Innovation. And they are pulling biomimicry into their programs. They have partnered with Interface, one of the original corporate industrial partners of Biomimicry 3.8. So that's just a starting point. There's a lot of great books out there. Maybe we can share some in a follow-up email to this post, but yeah, hopefully that gets you started if you didn't already know about those. Thanks for I see the Great Lakes Biomimicry showing up in the chat and the link to that. So mahalo nui.
Thank you, Daniel. That was great. I would just underscore everything Daniel said about the Biomimicry Institute, Biomimicry 3.8. If you are interested in the Living Systems Leadership Women's Retreat that we do at Biomimicry for Social Innovation, Karen Allen is on the faculty, and I see she put something in the chat. I didn't see you on this call, Karen. Great. Karen Allen and I teach this together along with a third colleague named Rachel Bagby. And we'll be, hopefully, COVID allowing us, gathering next September from the 12th to the 17th of September in northern New Mexico. And that is a retreat particularly for women to bring together leadership development and learning from the natural world. And we do have scholarship money available if there's a financial limitation for folks. And since we didn't do it this year, we have a little extra scholarship money available for next year. So please think about that and get on our website and tell us you'd like to learn more. Also, Lily, you're in Minneapolis. We had some early conversations with the folks at the McKnight Foundation, which is based in Minneapolis. They have a lot of interest in biomimicry. And again, everything's been sort of paused because of COVID, but they're interested in bringing some biomimicry workshops up into that area. So I'd encourage you to just reach out to McKnight and say, hey, I hear you're interested in biomimicry. You can doing any workshops for the public up there? And that might keep the conversation going a little bit. Good. Maxine says she's going to be there next year. So that'll be great. You can come hang out with your friend Maxine. Monica Day, are you still here with us?
I am still here. I am the apparition.
It's getting darker where you are.
Because I'm in the dark. I'm on the East Coast, and it's so beautiful out that I couldn't sit inside like in a chair for another minute. So pardon the darkness. But I'm the person who wrote in the chat about doing work around displacement and looking specifically at, and I'm in a peace studies program, and I'm in a peace and conflict resolution program. So I don't know how this landed in my inbox, but hallelujah. And I think, I guess as I'm listening, and I don't know if this is a question or a comment, I'll let you decide, but as I've done a lot in my coaching practice around alignment of personal growth and transformation with the environment, right? That's just as a guide, because that always made sense to me. In the research that I'm doing now, it looks like attunement of our sensory perceptions and our embodiments with the environment could be a key right? And it's not something that's often understood by the places that are engaging in these sort of, refugee and replacement, types of programs. And I'm hoping that over time, my research might start to make a change. So I guess as I speak that out to you, I just wonder, in the landscape of everything in biomimicry, it's like, is there something that I'm saying that's making you go like, oh, you should talk to so-and-so, or you should be connected with this? I would love to know that, because I feel a little alone in my program and what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. And what I get a lot of when I talk about my ideas where I am is like, oh, that's fascinating. Never heard of that. So I think I need my people.
That's beautiful, yeah. Monica. I think that's brilliant. And the first thing that comes up for me is being locally attuned and responsive is one of those 26 life principles. And we've translated it as one of the 6 key living systems leadership practices. We've translated it as attuned to local context. And what it's pointing to is that in nature, all organisms are deeply attuned to the place where they are. They wouldn't survive otherwise. And that attunement is all about connecting with place, signaling, responding to feedback loops. Humans tend to, we have our sense of identity, and maybe we have a broader sense of community or family or community, or our networks get larger, but being deeply attuned to place is, for many folks, particularly indigenous communities, it's central to who they are, right? But I remember hearing somebody identify themselves at a group meeting. He said, well, I'm white and I'm not sure what that means. I think maybe it just means we move around a lot. And that attunement to context is, I think you're onto something brilliant. And in terms of this, like, how do we use our forebrains and our learning from nature to be able to design for resilience and regeneration in times when we really need it badly and we don't have time to evolve toward it? I think you're onto something. So yes, keep going. Come play with us. We would love to talk about it more. Yeah, and by the way,
thank you.
If you shoot me an email, I will send you a link to a recording of an early COVID webinar that I did that was about attuning to local context. And it might give you some resources that you can draw on. I haven't quite gotten things together yet to get it on my website. But by the way, I'll put it out to this community. I am looking for somebody to help me in the digital and communications side of things. So if there's somebody out there who's brilliant and interested in biomimicry and wants a part-time job, please reach out to me too, because I'm getting ready to hire somebody to help make all this digital world work better.
Can you say your email?
Toby, T-O-B-Y, at bio-sys.net.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I also just add something in response? Monica, it's a beautiful question. And as someone who's lived and learned and traveled in over 70 different countries and all 7 continents and been searching for home since birth, and maybe have found, a lot of what I've been looking for here in the community and place here in Hawaii, I've been really impressed with, and it builds on what Toby was talking about. Every time I learn about plants and how they, I'll say, make decisions, they're not making decisions, but they're being locally attuned, and they're responding to shifts in sunlight and water availability and gravity, and they're repositioning themselves, right? I love those time-lapse photos of plants as they shift throughout the day, and they're doing this incredible dance in response to those things. And we are the same. We are the same. We have all of those sensors, and we respond to all of those same signals. Those are our contexts and operating conditions too. And I can't tell you how much watching the moon and understanding the moon, and by extension, gravity and tides and all of those things, and then being in the water right? The fresh water, the streams, the ponds, the ocean, experiencing that as part of the environment, no matter where I am. I went to Antarctica. What did I have to do? The only idiot who couldn't wait to jump into the water, right? It's freezing cold, because that's one of the ways that I come to understand my place. And so with displaced communities, how do we invite them to connect with nature and connect with things they can understand? Because the moon was also reflecting the sun wherever they came from, and there was also water giving life to the landscape wherever they came from. And so helping them reconnect with those things that are both familiar but then have these nuanced differences, and letting their body literally, molecularly, chemically respond in the ways that it needs to. If we shut ourselves inside, those things become impossible. So yeah, Mahalo for your question. It's really beautiful. And I think you have found at least part of your family. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. May I jump in with a question from Maxine? She had to run.
Oh, I was just going to call on her. I'm sorry.
She had to run because she has another event, but she just has two quick interrelated questions. It's such a wonderful multifaceted discussion. Her questions are, what are we learning about rapid adaptation that might be happening in the natural world now in response to the climate crisis? And the second one is, what can nature teach about reparations and about repair and healing, building bridges with those with whom we are in conflict?
Hey, sorry, I just wanted to say hello.
You are here.
I just I jumped the queue a little bit, so I apologize. I was about to leave, but thank you, Maya, so much for inserting that question. I just affirming all that's been said, and just noting that the conflict. I just want us to note that we're in a time of tension where we haven't even gotten to a point where we're all sort of united on the need to address the climate crisis. And that seems to be one of the bigger hurdles. So I just wondered if there was some way to think about, and I use conflict air quotes because I don't want to suggest that it has to be. I think it's misapprehension or differences, whatever that is, it's still a hurdle.
Yeah, there's a lot to say there. And I'm going to draw on Daniel and Deb and the other biologists in the space. I'll say a couple of things to start, and maybe others can jump in here. About the conflict piece, there are a lot of folks out there who, when you think about nature, you think about all those things we see on the Discovery Channel, right? The scenes of animals in conflict with each other. And actually in the natural world, there is very little of that. There is a lot of positioning and signaling, and there's some competition, usually around mate selection, usually among males, but it's short-lived, and sometimes around territory. But mostly what we see is that animals are signaling to each other and negotiating to avoid conflict, because conflict is too expensive energetically. So they don't actually go there much. And what happens in the natural world is, rather than going head to head and being in conflict, there's more niche differentiation. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'll feed on this same tree at night, or I'll find a different part of the tree, or I'll go to that tree, or, there's a lot of working it out, because competition is actually maladaptive. It takes way too much energy. That would be a really good thing for us as humans to learn, right? And I think that in the work that you're doing, it's really central, right? Is how to teach people about the energy gain and the developmental benefits and the riches that come from actually investing in being more collaborative and being, this whole idea of positive peace, investing before there's a conflict in knit a web that can hold everybody and have the experiential knowing that this is better than the kind of clash. And I'll say one more thing about, and I'm going to really ask, maybe Deb dropped off. She's the biology in the house, biologist. The iterative piece, I think, is kind of our ticket as humans for jumping over the slowness of natural selection, because we have to do rapid prototyping in our brains and in the generations of things that we try. Whereas other organisms went through, you know, a literal generation and maybe hundreds or thousands of generations to adapt to be well suited for an environment that was very slowly changing. Our environment is very quickly changing. So we need to get into the habit of being able to try things and check it out and try things and learn from it and adapt and try something new and really know that we are using this gift / challenge to, but mostly gift. Maybe that's why we got these big forebrains, so that we could do this, like speed up the prototyping process to be able to be responsive to our environment in real time as things are changing really quickly. I don't know if that addresses your question at all, but it's what came to mind. Daniel, what would you add? And if there's any other biologists in the house.
Can I add to that?
Karen, you're here.
Yeah. Do you hear me? This is Lynn.
Yes, hi, Lynn.
Hi. I've been studying systems science for 20 years. And when what was her name? Starts with last name Dave. You were from the
Monica.
Midwest. Monica, hello, Monica. When you were saying, I feel so alone out here. It's because we all live within pockets of awareness, with different people have different levels of awareness, of connectivity. 20 years ago, when I started in this work, when I was introduced to this work, nobody knew what a network was. Now everybody networks, and it's part of the, you know, it's part of how we talk. The list that Toby had on, you know, feedback and cycles and these different kinds of things, now we're getting a feel for those things because of we have a feel for it that people just didn't have before. They didn't have before. We were in a mechanical, you know, but we've all been moving along. The good news is the culture has really been moving along. And now the culture is divided between the people who are kind of getting it, that we've got to learn from nature and be part of it, or we're in deep trouble, or you know, we've got to fight against it and do the old mechanical. Hopefully the world will. We've been doing great, you know. What I see is, to make it shorter, is what we need are what we have that makes it possible for us to catch up with this massive change that we've created, is imagination. And the capacity of the brain to actually picture another world, actually picture better worlds and create them. And that's the benefit of being a human being. It's you can also picture disasters and horribleness, but you can picture resiliency. So you can sit around, and the best thing you can do, and my initial introduction to systems was with a man called Bela Banathy out of Berkeley, who was showing how groups could do evolutionary design, working together by imagining a more perfect or a more interesting or a more you know, loving or whatever system in about 8 different areas. We applied it to the youth center in Paia, you know, like 15 years ago, and the thing's going so strong, and it's evolved ever since. There's ways to live in your imagination and create. And that's what humans get to do. That's the beauty of us. Once we understand what that means and how to use it. And thank you, Toby, you're tapping into all that.
Thank you, Lynn.
If I can build on Lynn's response and Toby's and Maxine's question really quickly. You know, nature is responding to climate change by diversifying. We're seeing speciation already playing out at faster rates in certain ecosystems, those most impacted by climate change. Ocean ecosystems will see it early. And I think, you know, it's one of the things that worries people about the spread of new bacteria, new viruses, because we have this sort of creation of all kinds of new germs. I don't want to get into that scary conversation, but the speciation is happening, diversification is happening in nature. Even though we have incredible imaginations, we often become fixated on particular solutions. nature doesn't become fixated in the way that we do. It retains its adaptability. Its structures to support learning are always to support adaptation, right? They're always to be able to respond and change and modify. If they're not, then those things go extinct, right? It's an unfortunate reality. But most of nature is expert at it. If it's survived this long, it's expert at it. And that includes us. We know how to adapt, but biomimicry is an invitation to remember to build learning structures where we put our imaginations to the purposes of constantly adapting and changing, which just feels like it's going to be a really difficult conflict because so many of us have grown up in structures and systems that we thought were always going to be there and that we're now fighting very hard to conserve and protect. Even those folks who might think, oh no, I'm on the side, I want to be with nature, we still have a hard time imagining changing as frequently as I think we're going to have to change many of our social, political, cultural, agricultural systems over the next dozens of years to centuries. So, you know, I think that's the invitation of our time is how do we start speciating and adapting and building the learning structures that support that so that our learning is put to not just remembering all of the things of old and trying to keep those things, but actually building the things that we're going to have to build anew. Yeah, mahalo.
Did that address your question, Maxine?
That did, and I have to run, but it was an incredibly beautiful note to end on. It makes me feel so hopeful. My heart's jumping. I'm so happy to have seen both of you do your thing over the last hour and a half, and I am so grateful to you. Thank you.
Maxine. A few people have mentioned hope, and I just want to share one thing. I was on an earlier webinar today with Jane Fonda and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It was awesome. I'd never really seen AOC in action, like just talking about what she believes. It was amazing. But one of the things she said that really struck me was that people asked her what gives her hope, and she said, you know, to me, hope is, I'm very hopeful, and it's the beginning of the work, right? Like hope isn't something you sit back and be like, oh, everything's okay now. Hope is actually what drives us to keep doing this work. And we need hope. And these things like these conversations that give us hope, if it can launch us into a new idea or a new practice or a new connection or a new network where we're going to devote ourselves even more to what's in front of us, I think that is this kind of speciation of new ideas and new approaches that Daniel's pointing toward. Lori, you've been so patient. Do you have a comment that's still relevant now, or was it from long ago?
It's a question, actually. And first of all, I just have to tell you, I love your cards. And I like to use them as oracle cards sometimes. So I was curious to see what I would pick, and you won't believe it. Octopus. I so recommend that movie. I have already recommended to everyone I know on the planet, and it is taking me down. We could have a whole year of seminars just talking about how that octopus knew how to sacrifice herself and knew how to, you know, regenerate, and all the connection and all the love she had when she was seen. We got to have more of these talks about just that movie. So I thought that was great. My question is, and I put it in the chat, but my question is this. And it makes me almost want to cry to ask. I don't just realize that. Why was I going to cry? I'm wondering, you know, you said before, white people. I really want to have this opportunity to connect with local indigenous people, Native Americans, where those that are ready and saying, you know, we really want to help you remember, you know, all of us immigrants that came over here, and, you know, our relatives are the ones that invaded in this land. What is the rebridging, and who might, now that we have COVID, we can't even get close. I can't even get to a reservation or find a wisdom leader, an elder. And I'm wondering if any of you know if there's somebody that is online that is sensing this desire, that is reaching out and teaching and helping us remember ourselves in this way as we move back towards original wisdom.
Great question. Any resources out there?
Lori, I'll just share a couple. It's not exactly, I don't think, what you're looking for, but I'll just share some names of some indigenous youth who I think are bringing, you know, one of the things I've so appreciated about being in Hawaii is that when I wanted to learn about Hokulea and wayfinding and traditional navigation and oceanic voyaging on board double-hulled canoes, that community, if I was willing to do the work that they were doing, and they were willing to have me and help me learn and be a part of that. Not every community is going to have its own sort of process of invitation and adoption and bringing people in, but a young woman by the name of Lila June is someone that, if you don't know, I would recommend. And the music and the attitude by a young gentleman named Scott Martinez has been a really inspiration to me, because the indigenous youth are finding a way to embrace the intersection of all the worlds that they occupy and they live in. We have some amazing examples here in Hawaii. Cliff Kopono, who I mentioned earlier, comes to mind. Some incredible people who are just fully invested in indigenous ways of being and fully standing in the worlds of so-called Western or modern or global culture as well, and they navigate it beautifully, and I get a lot of inspiration from them. So those few names are places that you can Google them and find some of the things they've done on the internet. But that's
yeah, and may I add to that, Scott Martinez, he has some roots in Hawaii too. Is it Maui, I think, or but the Earth Guardians are now sort of everywhere. They're coming from. There will be opportunities to connect, and I met him at the Nobel Peace Prize forum, and he really captivated the audience with his music. He was rapping about nature and climate, leadership, and indigenous futures, and he did so in a way that was really able to bridge audiences, and I think that he said to everyone that he wanted to connect them to communities who are doing this work all over. So it is not grounded simply in one place. So I think that's a good suggestion. I'll type his name in the chat for you.
Thank you. I may have seen him rap at Bioengineers a couple years ago.
Yeah, he's cool.
He's cool. But I would appreciate that because I don't remember his name. Thank you so much, everyone.
And Lori, I can't remember, are you in the Bay Area?
I used to be. When I bought your cards, I was. I'm San Diego now.
Okay.
So, and since watching that movie about the octopus, I found out we have caves and we have a kelp forest. I'm going to go with just the little snorkel and no wetsuit. I want to experience it as much as I can, because I remember he kept saying that too. I'm down here and feeling the cold. This is part of it. So right now we have great white sharks going by, so I'm going to wait a few months, but I am going to do it.
And I want to point out, Monica put in the chat about, using, as white people, explore indigeneity as well. Like, it's really important for us to be looking at our own cultural roots and being in, deep listening and honoring mode when indigenous Native Americans, Native Hawaiians are interested in sharing, but there's a deep rootedness in our own culture that we can explore as well, and need to.
We need to, yeah.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Maybe just another 5 minutes or so, if there's anybody who has a comment or something you want to share.
Toby, I just have to share that this was beautiful. It's always wonderful. What a gift to have a front row seat to you sharing with us. Thank you. And to the community that's here, what an honor and privilege it's been to share this time. I'm a couple minutes late to some young people who are waiting on me, so I'm going to jump over to another Zoom and talk about building a resilient and regenerative future with the future. And so I'm excited to do that, but just really appreciate all of you. Mahalo to Zelda and Kiona, the team that was putting this all together behind the scenes. Thank you guys for everything.
Daniel, you're a treasure. Thank you so much for being part of this. It just meant so much for you to just say yes and jump in so wholeheartedly and add so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Aloha nui.
Yes, mahalo to you both. You are amazing and lovely.
Beautiful. One more little plug I'll just share. I should check in with Zelda and Maya about this, but I would like, and now we're down some, but people who came on this, I'm going to include you in my outreach list. Is that okay? Is that Zelda's saying yes?
Absolutely.
And you can always opt out. So if you don't want to get stuff from me, please opt out. But the next thing that we're going to be doing is I'm doing a kind of, I call it Biomimicry Book Club. But I think the official name is Voices of Nature Author Series, where I noticed that so many, mostly women that I know, are writing these amazing books where they're bringing nature's intelligence forward. And it's hard to promote books these days. You don't just like sign on with a publishing company and have them do all the work anymore. It's a lot of outreach. And so I did one that you can find on YouTube, Flying Lead Change, with my friend Kelly Wendorf. She's works with horses, and we had a great conversation about her new book. And on November 12th, I'm going to have a conversation with Catherine Collins, who, if you have not met Catherine Collins, she's just exquisite. She's on the board of the Biomimicry 3.8. She's been a biomimic for a long time. She's a finance person. And she has this other life where she has an email list every Sunday morning. She sends out these beautiful little nature-inspired blurbs, and she put it together into a book. So we're going to be doing a conversation a little early for Hawaiian folks, unless you get up early. I think it's noon Mountain Time, so it's 8 o'clock your time on November 12th, if you want to come be part of another conversation with a cool biomimic person. And I'm just so grateful that people showed up and are interested in this and want to learn and are making the connections. And anytime we can bring communities together and cross-pollinate, there's something about that that just brings joy to my heart, because I know that that is actually how the work goes out there, is people to people, community to community, intersecting networks around the work that's important in the conversations we need to have in a local and global kind of way.
We are grateful.
Mahalo.
Thank you, Toby. Mahalo.
May we meet in person at some point.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Toby. Thank you to everyone. And I hope you all have a really, truly beautiful weekend. Thank you.